Tonight, we read True Encounters of the Beast in the Woods. My ex-wife, I mean Bigfoot. Lock your windows, lock your doors, and enter the alternate nightmare. It was the month of July 2009 in Fairbanks, Alaska. I was heading south on Auburn Doctor toward Farmers Loop, about 1 mile away. It is a wooded area frequented by homes and, in general, would be considered a populated area. Houses are on an average of about 100 to 200 feet apart, with only the general area around and close to the homes cleared out. Most of the area by far is wooded. It was the section of the road where it passes by Pearl Creek Elementary School. The school can be seen through the woods. Some of the woods in the area are pretty thick and, in some places, can't be seen into more than about 10 or 15 feet. But in this area, it had been cleaned out quite a bit, and sightlines into the siding section were very open. The school and vegetable garden could be seen off to the right from the road I was on. It was about 6 p.m., and I was heading home after a day of working on a deck I was building. The weather was evident with the sun high in the sky. As I was driving, I happened to notice a man standing by the right side of the road about 100 yards ahead. It was more of unconscious recognition. There's nothing unusual about a man standing on the side of the road in this area. As I got to within about 50 yards, I looked closer. That's no man, I said to myself. Shortly after that, 1 or 2 seconds, he bolted into the woods towards the school. He did it like a wild animal would do if spooked. I didn't slow down until I got to the place where I saw him go into the woods, which is where I stopped. I could see him running away from the road, and when he was into the woods about 30 yards or so, he turned left and was now running parallel to the road in the same direction I was heading. I got a good look at him, but not his face. I could have probably seen his face had I not been so mesmerized and had the presence of mind to look at it. I was busy noticing other things. His fur or hair looked to be about 3 to 4 inches all over the central part of his body. It was a reddish rusty color. I was mildly struck by how red it was, but it had some rustiness to it. He was about 6 feet tall and looked to weigh about 200 pounds. He ran with a strange hoppy kind of run. It wasn't limp. With one foot he pushed off with was more a typical running move, but the other foot he pushed off propelled him upward and forward. I watched him until he disappeared into the woods. There was a road about 100 yards ahead, and I took off to get to it so that I could turn right and, in 20 yards, turn right again to the road that led to the school parking lot. So the wooded area he was in was a peninsula, and he seemingly had to be in there somewhere. From that angle, the woods I was looking into were quite thick, and I didn't see him and haven't seen him since. A little farther up on the right was the school garden with people in it, which I'm now sorry I didn't stop talking to them about it. The next day as I was driving into work on the deck, I naturally slowed down in the area where I saw him and surveying the room when a couple walking their dogs were approaching. I flagged them down and told the story of what happened the evening before. They told me that about a week earlier, they were with their dogs and were on the way to another side of the school property by the soccer field. And 3 kids came running over to them saying, "Did you see the Sasquatch? Did you see the Sasquatch?" They also said that what appeared to be a dad was with them, who didn't seem too excited about it. My conclusion to whether it was real or not is summed up by saying, it was either real or there was a man in a very, very convincing costume. I reported it to the Fish and Game office in Fairbanks a couple of days later. The person who was taking the report was rolling his eyes through the whole thing as he seemed to be writing it down on a piece of scrap paper. I even had to ask him to take my phone number just in case. Around 6:45 p.m. on April 23, 2008, my son and I were coming into the U.S. from Canada. We traveled west about 14 miles on the U.S. side of the U.S.-Canada border on the Alaskan Highway. My son was driving. If you've ever driven that road, then you know how the pavement has considerable dips in it. I suspect from the freezing and thawing of the foundation of soil under the pavement. Anyway, my son watched directly in front of the car to make sure we took the smoothest path around some upcoming heaves in the pavement. I observed further down the highway as I had made our entire trip from Lethbridge. I hoped to catch a glimpse of a bear, moose, or some excellent wildlife or some kind. Anyway, we were on a slight descent down a hill, making a small left corner and about to start up the other side when I saw what I thought was a human crossing the road. Made 3/10 of a mile ahead of us and up then slight incline. He was a tall, odd-looking fellow, and I joked when I first saw him, "Well, there is Sasquatch up the road, fully expecting to see that a person had crossed from a house or something on the left-hand side of the road over to another place or something on the right-hand side. There was nothing when we got to where the structure should have been. I mean nothing. And no sign of any human, animal, or anything else on the right-hand side of the road in the woods. This thing was walking upright like a man, with long arms and what looked like a long neck from the side. If nothing else, someone was wearing a suit to make them look like the Sasquatch character. This excerpt from a short story I wrote about this hunting trip for mostly my family. I am 64 years old and have 40-plus years in law enforcement, currently serving as chief of police. With hunting season not to open until the day after next, we were in no hurry and enjoyed the evening with a touch of good single malt Irish, talking about our past hunts and the one we were about to have. Unfortunately, Lloyd and Davis would not arrive until the first day of the search, presumably because Dave had become domesticated sometime after the previous year's hunt and had to attend a retirement party before leaving Valdez for camp. But the evening expending and the toll the day had taken on us. We were in our sleeping bags and doubtlessly turning logs into sawdust by 2,300 hours. The stove was stoked with fresh firewood, and all was good. About 2:15, I awoke feeling way too warm, unzipped my bag, slinging the top off, when I heard a resounding crack of wood striking wood, similar to a Louisville slugger solidly striking a large, sound birch tree very close to the cabin. There being no one within many miles of us, my attention was immediately focused on the sound. A few seconds later, the sound was repeated, which was the pattern for several minutes while I attempted to evaluate it to determine its source. I finally decided to wake Bill, saying in just above a whisper, "Hey, Bill." He stirred, responding with something that sounded like what, and did not move again for 20 minutes. When he woke up and asked what was going on. In the meantime, the commotion stopped when I initially attempted to awaken Bill up, and I was sitting on the bunk with my 450 in hand, waiting for whatever eventuality might arise. Nearing 0300 hours, I finally returned to a sound slumber, waking well into the following morning. With a spot of coffee in our gullets and having explained to Bill the previous night's events, we explored the area of the old village, inclusive of the nearby graveyard, to find an explanation. We saw numerous paths traversing the grassy area around the cabins with many bedding sites. However, never did we find anything that would provide us with an answer to the source of sounds. Explaining this to another friend after our return, with the experience of spending many years living in numerous villages, he asked me if there was a native graveyard nearby. It is less than 50 yards from the cabin. Nevertheless, I named the source Sassy. This happened in late August of 1997 in a side valley of Goldstream Valley, a relatively populated area just north of Fairbanks. Although it's pretty close to the Fairbanks area and many houses and roads in the central part of Goldstream, the side valleys are still as wild as they were 1,000 years ago. I was hunting ruffed grouse in one of these side valleys, and I prefer not to say which one. I was on a south-facing aspen-covered hillside and had tracked all afternoon and evening, intending to spend the night out on the hill and hunt my way back in the morning. A black bear almost walked right into me as I was making camp. I heard him coming from a ways off and scared him away before he got closer. Later on, it will become apparent why I mention this. So I was sleeping out in the open, no tent, under a spruce tree. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was awakened by something prowling around my camp, maybe 30 feet or so away from me, walking in a circle. I mentioned the bear before. This was not a bear I heard in the night. My father is a hunting guide, and I grew up hunting bears, so I know what a bear sounds like when it's walking. Whatever this thing was, it was walking on 2 legs, with a bit of a shuffling sound between each step, like it was dragging its feet a bit. The leaves on the forest floor were dry like potato chips, breaking a lot of branches. I could hear it and follow its movement quite distinctly. I have to say here that I've spent a lot of time in the Alaskan bush, and have never before or since been truly afraid of anything I've encountered, but I don't mind saying that on that particular night, I was shaking with fear. It circled my camp for what seemed like hours, but it was probably only 5 minutes or so. Finally, remembering something I had once read about the Athabascan Indians' beliefs regarding woodsmen, I started talking to it, albeit in a shaky voice, saying I wanted no trouble that night. The thing stopped dead in its tracks. Then a few moments later, I heard it trotting downhill, away from me. Talking to such a creature may sound like a cornball, but All I know is that it worked. I've kicked myself for this many times since, but I didn't bother to look for any tracks, hair, etc. I just packed up and resumed my hunting. After that, I had no further trouble with the woodsman. As a final couple of notes, I recall hearing a kind of low muttering sound as it was creeping around me. Also, I have since done some reading on Bigfoot sightings. I've noticed that many people report the animal having a robust foul odor to it. However, I did not smell any particular scent, offensive or otherwise. I was part of a group of about a dozen Army personnel training in the area. It was summer on a warm, clear day. We were above tree line and had been camped there for several days. I was looking across the nearest valley when I spotted movement. It was on the base of a steep mountainside and bare, rocky terrain, with snowfields descending the small gullies on the hillside. It was moving up the valley about a half-mile away. When it crossed the snow, you could see that it was not a bear. It walked upright with long strides and arms swinging and moved fast across the white snow. It was dark in color like a bear. I have often seen bears in the same type of terrain, and they do not move as this did. It was too big and fast to be a human. Bears can and do walk upright, usually for short instances when they need to see or smell something and need the height. But they don't travel in this manner and not in rugged terrain. I pointed it out to the other guys, and we watched it until you could no longer see it. It was hard to see against the rocks when it was out of the snow. We wanted to look at the tracks, but everyone was scared to go down there. We had to sleep there that night, and nobody would go outside after dark. The next day we got out and never went back. 20 years later, I still would not go up there even with a group and with guns. The only thing I have seen that looked like this is the descriptions of Bigfoot. I was telling a friend about this, and he said he found tracks in the sand in Alaska out by King Salmon. He said they were over 2 feet long, but looked human. He has a lot of outdoor experience here and says they were in no way the tracks of a bear. This was also in a remote area where you don't see other people, only in plains. This incident happened last night just after 11 p.m. My daughter was home alone. She lives with a relative who was out of town. She called me at 11:22 p.m. She was terrified. She said she could hear something walking back and forth by her bedroom window. She also said she looked out the window when she first heard it and saw something big and black, massive. She described the thing to have been about 3 to 4 feet above the bottom of the window. When I went down to look behind the house this morning, I stood by the window. I am 5'4", and my eyes reached the bottom of the window, so I figure this thing must have been 7 to 8 feet tall. We live in a small village of less than 500 population. There are a lot of bushes and trees in between the houses. Their house is close to the beach, and a forest surrounds the town. Now, I've never known my daughter to be afraid of anything, but last night when I went to pick her up, she was shaking like a leaf. She was hysterical. It took me almost an hour to calm her down. I questioned her about what had happened. She called me about 5 minutes after she first saw it. She was too scared to move. I would not look behind the house when I got down there, but she was hiding in my relative's closet. She said it was walking back and forth right behind the house. She described the footsteps as a sound that someone substantial walking on 2 feet, kind of like a stomping. My daughter is very down to earth, not one prone to dramatics. When I first went down there, I didn't know what was going on, just that my daughter was scared spitless, but I would not look behind the house. When I went up to the house, my hair felt like it was standing on end, and I had goosebumps badly. I was scared and didn't know why. If tonight's story slapped harder than Chris Brown to Rihanna, then slap that subscribe button just as hard, and keep a lookout for the next batch of horror stories